Well, here we are. Welcome everyone. Okay, I'm just gonna fix that weird problem that I have every darn time that I do this. Won't be long. For some reason the camera 1080p has some kind of problem, so I have to reset the 1080p every time because, or else I look like I'm moving in a different fashion. Here we go. Look like an extraterrestrial moving in a weird way. So here we go, and welcome everybody. So welcome to this live show. This is Learn the Tech number 20 for September the 6th, 2016. And of course today is the history of Apple computers. And of course, hopefully you people will love the show. I'm going to keep an eye on the stream. Make sure that everything goes, and hopefully you enjoyed today's show. So Apple computers, last week, 2 weeks ago, we didn't have a show because of my technical difficulties. I'm really sorry about that. But I'm getting the hang of it now with all the things that's been happening and how I'm setting up, getting more and more experience. So glitches will be less and less in the future. So Microsoft's history is an interesting one because it's about people that were in the right place in the right time, people that took the right decision and became famous, a company became huge. Apple Computers is an interesting story because it has good and bad. Microsoft is pretty much, linear with moving up, and it's moving up, and it's moving up. And it's that huge company. Apple isn't that type of company. It's a company that has struggles throughout its time, and it's very interesting to see that. So we'll be going through a little bit, of course, quickly through the history of the Apple computer, but I think it's going to be really nice to have a little more. So, of course, Apple computer. The name Apple comes from the fact that at some point they're talking about, Steve Jobs is talking about his favorite food and his especially there's even a category in there, and he likes the Apple brand. He likes the name Apple. There's something about it that he finds it's cool. And you know what? That name actually gets them into trouble at some point. Why? Because for those that remember the Beatles were on a label called Apple Records. And for some reason, Apple Records wasn't very happy with Apple computers. But they finally got it off, because it's like, well, we're not the same thing. Apple Corp, we're Apple Computers Corp. It's different, and it's not the same thing, and we're not in the same category. We haven't stolen your name or anything. So it all starts in 1976 with these two guys, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. Steve Wozniak, so the two Steves are the guys that started all up. And contrary to Microsoft, where Bill Gates knows, they know each other. In Microsoft side, here, Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs, they don't know each other. They're not friends. They are simply two guys that someday meet up at the local computer. It's a kind of a computer club where people are meeting up and talking about computers, and they're kind of computer fanatics, basically. And they meet there, and they start talking about computers, and they share a common interest of how computers can change the world. So Steve Wozniak is extremely good in electronics. Steve Jobs is more of, I got ideas of things that we can build and do that will change the world. And these two minds together think about something. But the problem is they don't have 1 cent. They don't have a penny. They have no money to start up. they ask a third guy that kind of gives $500 to start everything, but he gets scared, and it doesn't take long that he's out. They get money here and there. The funny story is that Steve Jobs has a Volkswagen truck or bus, and he sells it off, and he takes that money to start Apple computers and start their ideas. Steve Wozniak has an expensive HP calculator that he sells off so that they can have money to start their own idea. And the funny thing is, at the first meeting where they want to talk about products, Steve Jobs isn't sure it's the right thing, and he almost doesn't show up because he thinks, well, maybe I'm just wasting my time or something. But he finally does show up, and it makes all the difference in the world, as we know today. It's just incredible. Together, they build this. This is the first Apple computer. It's made of wood. Their idea behind this is it's got to be friendly. So what's friendly at the time? A typewriter. Typewriter is pretty much what every secretary is using at the time. So they say it has to look like a typewriter. It has to hook up to a television because people have TVs. And so they built this thing, but the problem is it doesn't have software. It has nothing. Basically, this is an empty box. It's a computer that doesn't do anything because it doesn't have any software in it. And they built this by hand. So Steve Wozniak builds this by hand, and basically they need customers. They're still broke. So remember that. They still have no money at all. And basically, they need to do something with this in order for them to get a little cash flow. Steve Wozniak has the idea of, let's just sell it for barely above the price of the parts, and slowly we'll build something. Steve Jobs doesn't think like that. He thinks, no, we're going to sell this thing at a good price, and we'll get somebody that's going to jump on the bandwagon and want to buy this. So what happens is they get involved with a local shop that is called the Byte Shop. It's a computer store in California. And Steve Jobs goes there and says, look, we've got a great product. It's fantastic. It's going to change the world. And he's such a good seller that basically he convinced this shop that they could buy 200 of those. Well, at first 50. I'll say 50 of those for $666. And even though at first they're like, we're not really sure, basically they finalize and they say, okay, we're going to buy 50 out of you for $666. Problem, they don't have 50 of them. They have at that time maybe 3. They need to build 47. So Steve Jobs bluffed by saying, oh, we've got tons of them already, so we can ship them to you. So they actually take the family. So Steve's family, Steve Jobs' family, Steve Wozniak's family, they get a crash course in soldering, and they are in the garage, in the basement, and they build these by hand, one by one. And basically, they complete one, they test it, they make sure it works, and when they get 50, they bring that to the store. But the thing is, the first one that they see, the store owner says, well, you know what? It's like, what does it do? It doesn't have anything or an operating system, and that is a big problem. But even then, they're able to still sell the 50 to this shop. And basically that Apple I computer sells 200 units in the first year in 1977. And that helps them get money, because by selling 50, they get the money for the 50 right here, right away from this shop. So they have the money to buy the parts, they have the money to buy everything they need to actually make the computer, because they don't have a penny to pay for the parts to make the computer. They need cash all the time. So it starts like that, and you know, it's funny because it is a computer that doesn't do much, but it has some unique look and ability, and basically there aren't many in the world that still exist of this Apple I computer. The last time that I've seen one was at an auction in the United States. It sold for $900,000, so it gives you an idea. So they're moving on, but they have ideas, because now they got a little bit of money, so they can design something a little better, and they get to the point where they actually have this Apple II computer. Now this is the plus one, it's a little more advanced, but Apple II computer. The Apple II computer now has a lot more capabilities. They actually can rent time in some facility to test stuff. They actually can build something that is color, and it's actually the most advanced computer of its time. Then again, that is Steve Jobs working. They're not the inventor, you know, and you'll see this throughout the history that we're talking today. They aren't the inventor, the first one that did something. They are never the first one that did something. They are the first one that makes something that's really good that people want to buy. That's a big difference, because they aren't the first in almost everything that they do. But they are the first to really sell it and market it really well. So the Apple II has something that no computer has at the time. First of all, it's 1977. Commodore PET computer is a big competition to this. Basically, this is something that has to go head-to-head with some new computers that are actually coming now. Because the computer market in 1977, it's starting. It's really there that we can see that there are some ideas and new computers that are coming to market. It's the first computer that has color graphics. It's the first time a computer has color graphics. And this makes this Apple II really advanced compared to any other computer at the time. And so they sell this. At first, they do sell some, but it comes back to the point, you know, they have floppy disks, they have all sorts of little things. It has a kind of a little operating system or programs that can run on it. But it's slow, you know, the sales are hard. People are wondering, what am I going to do? It's a little expensive. It's like, you know, in the more than $1,000 range. We're in 1977. So you got to think that $1,000 in 1977 is much harder to get by than in 2016. Even though in 2016 it's still hard to get by. So what really changes the sales of this, because IBM is starting to think of its IBM PC and stuff, and it's marketing all of that towards business. Steve Jobs also is thinking of business with this, and he's wondering, and that's when they get a real big break. And the big break comes in the form of a software called VisiCalc. VisiCalc, for those that wonder what that is, it's the equivalent of Excel for Microsoft today. It's a spreadsheet. They sell this and say this is a magical piece of paper that will automatically calculate everything. So if you have a business, you got to have this. You got to have a computer and have this, because this is going to save you a lot of time. And it does. This software is what pushes the Apple II computer in big sales, because companies are now seeing, hey, that's kind of interesting. But not just companies. It actually gives a purpose to a computer. Until 1977, it's mostly seen as some kind of hobbyist thing that's expensive. but people have no idea what you can do with a computer. How useful could this be? VisiCalc gives a purpose to the computer, something that it could do that is useful to you. And that pushes the Apple II sales really, really big time. And it helps a lot Apple computer and growing, of course. And they're thinking of devices. They are working with Xerox because Steve Jobs, of course, is close to Xerox. He worked there. He could get parts from there. He could get a lot of things. And Xerox is already working on a mouse. It's once again, like I'm saying, it ain't something new when they're inventing something. But Xerox has like a 3-button mouse. It's kind of complicated. Steve Jobs is thinking of the mouse as something basic. And he wants to have a computer that can actually run with something, have some kind of graphical interface, something that is interesting. So they invent the 1-button mouse. Why? Steve Jobs, back then, until his death, always thought of everything computer needs to be simple. Why 2, 3, 5-button mouses? Why a computer needs to be opened and fiddled with? No, it should be a closed box that nobody has to go play inside and that does what you want simply. And so 1-button mouse is what comes to their mind. The difference also is that the Xerox mouse is about $400 back then. Apple mouse, Steve Jobs really wants the Apple mouse to be inexpensive. So they want a mouse for $25. So they come up with this. And basically, it's stayed pretty much, except for the design that looks old here, stayed pretty much the same thing the whole way through, even the new mouse today, which is basically one clicker still. Now, they're moving ahead, but there are 2 programs going on. They've got more money, so they got money to start investing in really, really all sorts of new designs and something that's really far ahead of its time. Steve Jobs thinks of this computer, the Lisa. Now, a lot of people think Lisa is because of his daughter. That's called Lisa. It is not, apparently. It's I don't remember the term, but each letter means something. It's like a large-scale integration, whatever, computer. So the Lisa is a name that is for computing. Not a lot of people always thought it was because of his daughter. It's called Lisa, and apparently it's not. But this thing starts to being developed in 1979, 78, and the way Steve Jobs thinks about this is making this extremely expensive. And when I say extremely expensive, it pushes this machine, when it eventually gets out, to the $5,000 or $6,000 range. And you know what? A lot of people at Apple aren't happy because they're thinking, okay, there's a limit to how much expensive a computer can be. And what happens is that there's kind of an internal fight between Steve Jobs and some of the high-ranking players at Apple Computers. So a lot of them think Steve Jobs is a little crazy and that it's not going in the right direction. So, of course, the Lisa will be released. But another project is going to be released, and it's the Macintosh. And that one also is something that comes from about 1979 when they start thinking about this machine. Because of internal tensions and everything, Steve Jobs gets pushed down and he becomes almost just, a little chief employee of the Macintosh team, which is not his baby. His baby is Lisa, and that's where he wanted to be. But they're pushing him on this, which is the Macintosh. And because they want to push this, it's lower priced, and it's already, when he gets there, very advanced in the stage of development. But you can see that the tensions of the way that Steve Jobs thinks and how everybody else thinks at the company are really creating a lot of friction. So we're getting near really a dramatic moment in Apple Computers with Steve Jobs. Of course, this computer sells more than the Lisa, partly because of its price tag. The Macintosh is less expensive. And it actually sells well, but one of the most amazing events will happen at the Super Bowl of 1984. At the Super Bowl of 1984, there's this ad. This ad is amazing. It's an ad where, for anybody that's my age, we've seen this ad more than once. It's an ad that costs a lot of money, first of all. They decide to invest, apparently, more than $500,000 in the ad, which is something almost incredible for the time. They hire Ridley Scott, which is famous for a lot of his, movies like Alien and so on. And what else? I'm thinking of that guy from the future with the robots, but her name doesn't come. But basically, this ad creates a momentum. Apple sells Macintosh at a rate that is phenomenal, and we're in 1984. It is racing against so many machines because in 1984, we've got Commodore 64 that's very powerful. We've got Atari computers. We've got tons of IBM machines, the IBM PC Junior, and so on. One thing remains clear, though. IBM is dominating in the business side. Apple has a lot of struggle in going into that business side, but it's at least selling computers, and it's happy with that. And they're making more and more money and going more and more advanced. They start new peripherals. A laser printer. This is a laser writer. This is the first Apple laser printer. Once again, it's not the first laser printer. Other companies have made laser printers before. It's the first laser printer that somebody can actually bring home. That's the difference. Once again, we see that they're not the first in line to invent anything. Apple does not invent anything. They just make something in a price range and with the way that it works that people like. What a lot of IT guys like is that this is the first ever printer that is already network ready. It already can be linked with tons of other computers everywhere. So, thanks to the way the Mac works in Apple talk. So, it's popular because it's simple to use and install and work. Once again, Steve Jobs is at work here. But tensions are running high, really high, really high. And at some point, too many people don't like Steve Jobs. He gets kicked out. And the replacement for Steve Jobs, and we're in 1987, is Jean-Louis Gasset. Jean-Louis Gasset takes over, and he's the guy that's going to start bringing Apple forward from 1988 around. Steve Jobs is gone. Steve Jobs is actually going and creating a new company, which is Next, which is a company of hardware and software computer. It's still computers, but Steve Jobs is going in another direction. He's creating his own company, doing something there. He's basically pushed out of Apple. They don't want him here. He's just too pretentious. He's got these ideas, these crazy ideas that are really expensive. Everybody thinks at Apple, if this guy stays, Apple is going down the drain. Nobody's going to buy these expensive things that he's thinking about. So this guy takes over, and for the next years after that, Apple Computer, basic computer company, selling all sorts of computers like this one. They have different models of all sorts. And, it starts looking more like a PC than anything special, because until then, every computer, everything that came out of the line of computers has a unique look, a unique feel to it. It looks like some kind of interesting machine. Starting from there, they have these machines like this one. looks like a PC, works on some operating system, but they're missing the boat about something very, very important. Up to this point, Apple is the king of the graphical user interface. They are the only company that makes PCs that have mouse capability, that have windows like this, that is, for a lot of people, easy to use compared to a DOS PC with, black and white screen, where you have command lines and so on. Commodore computers are complicated. You have to type in basic programs and stuff. It's really cryptic. Apple is advanced, but something is happening that it kind of blows away a little bit all that prestige. Microsoft is working on something called Windows. They have Windows 1, they had Windows 2, not very popular, but then comes Windows 3. And I can tell you, Windows 3 suddenly changes the game. All the advanced technology that Apple had with its Windows operating system, with its mouse, is suddenly matched by Windows 3. That is a huge hit for Microsoft. The PC suddenly has Windows, uses mouse, has pretty much all what Mac computers have, except for one thing. The PCs don't have the price tag that Macs have. And Windows is a less than $100 software that transforms your PC into what looks like a Mac computer. And by the way, Apple will sue Microsoft, saying that this is a copy of their own operating system. And they will sue for many years because, companies, when they have money, that's what happens. It goes on and lingers on and on and on and on all the time. And Apple is trying to get money from Microsoft because they're like, look, you're copying our design, you're copying our stuff. But they don't realize how this has an impact, a major impact on what's going to follow. Of course, they continue on. They have computers like this, the Quadra 605. They use a new technology, which is the Power PC. So at some point, they switch. They have a affiliation with IBM and Xerox, and they built Power PC chip, which will be for many years the dominant chip that will power these computers. And so, as they go on, they have all sorts of these little designs. They have the Performa series also. Once again, Mac computers that look so much like PCs. And that's where you see when Steve Jobs is gone, everything looks rather blunt and, has nothing special in it. And that Jean-Louis Gasset is a guy that thinks about not how things need to look. He's thinking about how we sell computers. He's in a mode where my company needs to sell products. Where Steve Jobs is in a mode, we need to do fantastic products that people want because they're simple and they're beautiful. Very, very different in the way of thinking. Of course, continue on, there's Power Macintosh with the Power PC processor. The problem is, you get these new machines, but sales are declining all the time. Sales are declining because the PC market is at a big push. Windows 3, Windows 95, huge hit. Windows 95, people are actually lining up at midnight to get a copy of their Windows 95 operating system. Imagine that. Nobody today is waiting in line to get Windows 10, but imagine that. Windows 95, people are waiting in line to get a copy of it. You get these machines that are over $1,000. You get PCs that are often cheaper and that can run Windows. and they'll do everything that you want to do. The PC market is at, and it's really exploding. It's exploding. In the 80s, lots of mishmash of machines. Amiga, Commodore, the Tandy Radio Shack, TRS-80, stuff like that. All sorts of little machines like the Timex Sinclair and so on. But the market is slowly going down to very few machines. Why? Because these are expensive. Having too many machines is not really something that makes you create a lot of money, because there's just too many different machines that do many different things, that work with different types of languages of BASIC and so on. So slowly we're getting into a market where it's Mac and PC, but PC is dominating terribly thanks to the clones. 1997. In 1997, Apple Computers has approximately 6 months to a year of cash in the bank before they're running out of money. They are already thinking of actually doing bankruptcy. So in 1997, we're this close to Apple Computers shutting down, and it's over. They had their hits. They've slowly gained from 1977 with the Apple I up to about 1997 with their computers, but now they're not selling enough. They're losing a lot of money, and they just don't know what to do. So they throw out Jean-Louis Gasset, and they're not sure what to do exactly with that. Actually, Jean-Louis Gasset, let's just rectify, he's been out a few years back. It's somebody else that's there, and they're throwing out the guy that's there that I don't remember his name, and like nobody knows his name because he just didn't make any mark at Apple Computers. And they are going to see Steve Jobs and saying, look, you want to come back? We have nobody to guide our company. We have nobody that is actually going to help us, guide us. We're almost broke. We have no money, and we don't know what to do. So Steve Jobs comes back, but like I was saying earlier, he started a company that's called Next that has specific technologies of all sorts, including the basics of an operating system, which will later become OS X. So he comes back, and while he's coming back, they're getting a nice boost. Steve Jobs needs money because Apple is running out of cash. So he's wondering what he can do, and Microsoft helps them at that point. Yeah, Microsoft. These guys are like cat and mouse. They hate each other. Microsoft goes to Steve Jobs, and what he says is, look, if you put Internet Explorer on your Mac computers, if you put Office on your Mac computers, we will give you $150 million, and you have to put our Mac, our Internet Explorer browser, and our Office suite for 5 years on every Mac that you sell. And Steve Jobs will say yes for a very simple reason. They're running out of cash, and $150 million is kind of cool when you don't have any money. And he says, yep, okay. And for those that had Mac computers for a long time, you might remember you've seen Internet Explorer on Macs. I remember when I started my tech guy job in the year 2000, a lot of Mac computers had Internet Explorer. Some people were using Internet Explorer on Macs. So it's pretty amazing. So that $150 million, well, Steve Jobs will invest it. Of course, Office 98 for Mac is available. It comes part of the deal. Office products, Internet Explorer, it helps it helps Microsoft get part of the revenue stream from the side of Apple computers, and it ensures that the brand and the name stays there even for Mac operators. But with that cash, something new happens. Steve Jobs, the guy that thinks that computers should be simple and beautiful and that everything should be easy to use, comes up with this design. Well, not Steve Jobs. He has a bunch of guys, of course, that are looking into the devices. And the iMac is released. This turns everything around. It is all integrated. It has everything you want. People find it beautiful. It's a beautiful work of art. And they look at this as an interesting machine. Comes with all you need. Has a CD drive. Has a hard drive inside it. Has the operating system. It's beautiful. And it turns the company around. The fanatics, the fans that still continue to support, but were slowly losing their interest, are coming back. They see this and they say, wow, what an extraordinary machine. Of course, it runs on a PowerPC processor, has Internet Explorer, and of course Office. And it slowly turns the company around. Steve Jobs is back, and it shows in the designs. It shows in the way things are. Of course, second big hit, incredible hit. In 2001, he releases this big, clunky device. It's really big. For people that haven't seen the original, it's thick, it's heavy, but it has something that nobody else has. Once again, they didn't invent anything. In 2001, music players exist. Companies have music players. Sony has one. There are some music players available. But this guy invents something that he calls the iPod. Has an internal hard drive. Small hard drive. Can store thousands of songs. It's, once again, easy to use. It transforms how we listen to music suddenly. In the 80s, we had these big Walkman for cassettes, then the big Walkman for CDs, but now we're in the more miniature stuff. And this stores thousands of songs. It's easy to use, has a menu where you can select artists and everything. It's a huge hit. This becomes the #1 selling product at Apple in the years to come. iPods of every kind are invented, and they are the dominant sales force of Apple. And these devices are amazing. I've owned 1, 2, 3 iPods in my whole life. And of course, I was happy. These were great devices. And man, I loved my iPods would follow me everywhere. I can tell you that. Once again, Steve Jobs thinking of how a product should be. He gets all sorts of designs from his team. And now they're really gaining success. This is so popular that the company really is making a lot of money. And now they're really back on track. They will publish Mac OS X, the first version, around 2003, I believe. The dominant operating system for Macs, it's still OS X, as of course we're going to go into Mac OS now. So OS X will be the past in the naming, but still, it's, OS X is a huge hit. It transforms every Mac computer into something even more efficient, more interesting, does a lot more stuff. It's completely multimedia, and this operating system will dominate for, more than 10 years. It's still dominating today in the Mac side. One of the things that's happening when the iPod is out is that there's a music service that's actually kind of a stealing music service, Napster. I remember Napster. I remember how I installed this on my PC, I believe in 2000 or something like that, or 1999, 2000, and being amazed at all the free music. Of course, it was stealing, but all the free music that you could have here. This was incredible. Napster changes forever how we consume music. And you know what? Apple, they know that they will sell devices because we're stealing music and will put it on their device. But they're thinking further ahead. In 2001, Napster gets shut down. But there's other variants, BearShare and, well, man, there's so many. Steve Jobs thinks the music industry is not right. It's stealing its users with high-priced CDs and tons of songs and music that people don't like on each CD. He's thinking maybe we could do something better that people will like. They don't have to buy albums, and negotiations are really hard because he's thinking of a service that the record industry is not really very happy about. He's thinking, let's sell one song. Why not sell each song? Why force somebody to buy an album when you can buy one song? Once again, record industry isn't very, very, hot at this idea, but the problem is the iPod is such a huge success that Apple has a huge power in negotiations. So what happens? The response is iTunes. Apple knows it can make music, it can sell music, it can make money selling music, and that if we give the people the chance to buy one song, if they want only one song for 99 cents, he's sure that we're going to change the face of piracy. Instead of pirating music, basically people are going to buy music because it's cheap, because you can buy just your favorite song, and the bargain does pay off. iTunes is a huge hit. A lot of people will buy music thanks to iTunes. Problem, the sharing of revenue makes the company and some artists a little kind of pissed off. But there's no more turning back. Apple is playing on the side of, look, you rather make a lower amount of money but make money with our service, or lose everything with all the piracy that's going on out there. So they're able to push off a lot of stuff thanks to that. Second innovation. Once again, the smartphone is not invented by Apple. People will say, oh wow, they invented that. No, they did not. Smartphones existed before, including at Microsoft. Microsoft had a smartphone that they created before everybody else, before the Lumia, before everything. Even tablets, like the iPad. They just didn't take off and didn't work. Steve Jobs will unveil in 2006 the original iPhone. This thing reinvents how people use a smartphone. Cell phones are popular back then. They are pretty much, they start to really be in use, but now the smartphone is mixed in with a computer. You can play games, you can go on the internet and surf, you can do a lot of stuff with this, and also make calls and send text messages. The design, the simplicity of use makes this product a huge hit. We've been talking about, the first iMac got kind of a rebirth for Apple. The iPod became the cash cow of Apple. It became a huge hit. Now, iPhones. iPhones are now the dominant source of money. It's still today. Still to this day, and this is 2006, the original iPhone. Still today, the iPhone is the dominant money source of Apple. This is a huge hit. People are waiting in line to get one. They are going crazy over this. Of course, it has all the look, feel, design that Steve Jobs wants. It has the simplicity of usage that Steve Jobs wants for a device. And thanks to all of that, they're able to have a huge markup in the money they make on each of these devices, which makes, of course, Apple computers go higher and higher and higher in profits. And it changes literally the world. The iPhone changed the way we use our, phones. I have a Galaxy S7 phone from Samsung today, but I own the iPhone 3, 3G, iPhone 5. Now I've moved away, but it all started with this. This is the huge, huge success of Apple. Another big success, but that didn't last that long, the iPad. The iPad is introduced. It's a huge tablet, and it's actually a computer in a tablet form. It's a reader for books. It is a computer to do surfing on the web, watching videos, playing games. It does everything. And Steve Jobs has the idea that this replaces every computer in the world. Why buy a computer when you can have an iPad? It's smaller, it does everything. But it has some drawbacks. So at first, the iPad is very popular. The first iPad, second iPad are extremely popular. But tablet sales go down a little bit because, first of all, the iPad starts very rapidly sharing the market with Android devices that are tablets, that are less expensive. And also, the iPad has one problem, like the iPhone. It's a closed device where everything you do needs to be done through the App Store, through Apple products. And that makes this device less interesting for some category of users because some users will like to have the free side of the free will of doing whatever they want, where here you're kind of a little stuck. Also, the lack, and at the beginning it does show. I look at my clients and it did show a lot that it was a nuisance. Steve Jobs is thinking Flash player is a bad thing. It takes a lot of battery, crashes all the time. A Flash player should not be on a device. And Flash player is not on this. But when the first iPad came out, Flash websites are rather popular. And it does add a side where the iPad cannot view some content and do stuff like that. And it's a little, it does slightly impact on what the iPad does. But because of limits, because also of the fact that people understand, okay, but my phone does the same thing. It's just that this has a big screen. A lot of that makes the iPad a little in competition with all sorts of things, including their own MacBook line of computers. And of course, all sorts of elegant MacBook computers come out of Apple, MacBook Pros. They have polycarbonate or plastic MacBooks at some point, then aluminum, then MacBook Airs, thin design, very thin, lightweight. These are computers, these are the new Mac computers that dominate today. But they suffer from a lot of things. First, they suffer because the PC market at some point around 2010 starts to slump. It starts to decline. And people think, well, it's just the PC and Windows. No, MacBooks are also declining in sales. People are finding that their portable device, like their phones, do pretty much what they want. You know what? A good friend of mine that I saw this weekend, he used to own a computer, a laptop. He's got a Galaxy phone. And it's not the model that I have, but it's like a year before. It's still a good model. And he's starting to find that his smartphone does what he wants. Why have a computer suddenly? So a lot of that is going on, and of course, MacBooks, even though very beautiful machines, they start to suffer. The Apple Watch. Now we're after Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs died in 2011, I believe. And that's where we're at. The first new product post Steve Jobs, the Apple Watch. And of course we're wondering, would Steve Jobs, have created this like this? A lot of people say no. Tim Cook, which was Steve Jobs' number 2, is the guy now at Apple. And you know what? Is it just a coincidence? Is it just that we are at a point where things are changing in technology? But still, it seems that, new products, even though interesting, they aren't selling Apple Watches at the rate that they probably thought they would. It seems that they're having a harder time sell phones. They were almost a dominant force with the iPhone when it came out. The market is now dominated with Android phones of all sorts. I got a Galaxy S7, first time that I go from Apple to something else. A lot of people are in that mode, going from Apple to something else. Sales on the Apple products are really declining. Still, it's one of the most profitable company in the world right now. You still have time to do stuff. So what's next for Apple? From here, what do we think Apple could do to change things, to make the future an amazing place like it's been since the start of its very original products? There's a lot of speculation. Tomorrow, it's interesting to note that tomorrow, September 7th, Apple will have a keynote. Well, it's going to talk about new products. We know we'll have new iPhones, probably Apple Watch 2, some new MacBooks, new MacBook computers probably. But still, nothing in innovation. It seems that Apple has dried up in innovation of what they could do next, what new incredible product they could push to consumers. There was talk of an Apple car, an Apple TV, all sorts of Apple stuff. Yet, we don't hear a lot of details of anything new. We're even hearing details of that the iPhone 7 tomorrow will probably not be that much different from the iPhone 6. So where is Apple heading in the future? It's everybody's guess. Is the fact that Steve Jobs died making a huge impact, or that big of an impact on where it's going? Steve Jobs or Tim Cook, is Tim Cook incapable of really thinking of new stuff or innovating? It's very hard to say. We all, by the story that I just told you, we all realize one thing. Steve Jobs' ideas created Apple at the beginning. When it dropped down and almost disappeared, Steve Jobs revived and recreated the Apple of the beginning with products that are incredible. And so everybody will always compare Tim Cook to Steve Jobs. And I always say, well, maybe Tim Cook is not as good as Steve Jobs has ever been. And we got to be careful with that. There are things that, first of all, a lot of those products were probably not thought of by Steve Jobs himself. It's the team that worked on the products that thought of all these new products. We're also out of, in a new era of technology, I'm saying. You know what? People are realizing that computers are not necessarily all that they need, and there's a lot of products that people are not necessarily wanting. Price of technology will also make a big change. But I think, somewhere Apple maybe has some kind of a huge idea that everybody's going to be blown out and it's like, wow, this is incredible. This is the new thing. Let's hope so, because Apple right now is at a point where it's immensely popular, but it's losing in momentum. And we're wondering, will they ever be able to just go back to what Apple was at the beginning? So, hey everyone, this was my little story of Apple computers. There are missing facts and missing things in here, and I do realize this for some of you that are big fans of Apple. But this is the general sense and way of direction of Apple computers. So, hope that you enjoyed our little lecture on Apple computers. So this is the tech show. This is a 1-hour show where you decide what we're going to talk about. You have an idea of what you want me to talk about for an hour, anything about technology. It doesn't have to be the history of something. It could be how something works. It could be, someone actually give me an interesting idea, because I didn't think about that. I was always thinking of 1-hour shows about a subject, but it could be more than one subject in the same show also when you have multiple subjects that are smaller. So, we'll see. I think it's going to be interesting to see the next future. So, just post comments. Let me know what you want to see in future episodes, because you decide. So we are here every Tuesdays live from 6 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. That's 2200 hours Universal Time. And we have, of course, our subject of the week. Remember, if you like our shows, Patreon, patreon.com/radio and computers. There's PayPal possible for donations. Really helps us a lot in making things better. If you enjoy our show, it takes a lot of time to prepare something like this. I can tell you that I've spent many hours creating this little presentation, even though it might look simple for some people. It takes a lot of time to do so. So think about it. All the details are on my channel if you enjoy what I do. Next week on Learn the Tech, the impact of social websites on our lives. Social websites like Facebook, Twitter, and so many more. The impact of technology itself with our social lives. We'll talk about not just Facebook and Twitter, the way we interact with our smartphones and everything. I think that's going to be an interesting show. And we'll see how it transformed forever. And where it comes from. When is the first time we interacted with some electronic gadget in a social way? And up to how we interact today and how it's changing forever. Not only how we interact with people, but how it also is changing the opinions of everybody, and how suddenly everybody has some opinion on something. And how people that will never get a voice suddenly get a voice in a crowd. Take care, everyone. See you next week. 3 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time is our show where we answer your questions. 90 minutes where we answer your questions. And this is Learn the Tech. 6 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, 2200 hours UTC. Take care. See you soon. Bye-bye.